Welcome to the Artful Teaching Podcast, where teachers are brought out of isolation and into conversation.
Here, we spotlight professional educators as both artists and leaders, and examine how the arts deepen student learning and improve school culture.
Education is a demanding field, and we've seen teachers rise to the challenges of their profession by leveraging the arts in the classroom.
Integrating dance, drama, music, visual arts, and media arts can bring so much joy, and we're excited to share that with you.
We're your hosts, Callie Phlox
and Heather Francis.
Thanks for joining us to hear various perspectives on the art of teaching.
Welcome to the Artful Teaching Podcast and back to our series on STEM and the arts. I'm here again with my co-host Tina McCulloch for this series, and it's my privilege today to interview her about how she integrates the STEM and arts in her classroom. And we're going to talk about one specific strategy that she has found to help her students really lean into their inquiry to learn about different scientific phenomena. So, welcome, Tina.
Thank you. I am so excited to be here and doing the STEM and Arts series of the Artful Teaching Podcast, and also an opportunity to share some exciting things that are happening in instructional psychology and technology here at BYU.
That's right, because you are a student here in the IP&T program here at BYU.
That's right. I just started this new adventure this fall and am excited to see how all the things that I was learning during the pandemic is really impacting classrooms today.
Yes, and what else do you want us to know about you as we get started?
One of the reasons that I decided to head back into a graduate experience is because education in the classroom is changing so quickly. And as teachers, we're having almost a panic attack on trying to keep up. And I have found arts integration as a lifesaver for myself and my fellow educators. And yet we're being thrown into so many new theoretical models of teaching that we're losing our own teaching identity. And so I hope that this podcast brings back a comfort zone, the arts, as we move forward in STEM and more inquiry-based learning in our classrooms.
Yes, and I am excited to have you as a host this season because you are in the classroom and you can really speak to the teachers' experiences. And so tell us how teaching science has changed in classrooms. I know Utah has adopted new SEED standards for the entire K-12 curriculum, and it's very different than the science standards in the past.
Yes, that has been a really interesting challenge. They were adopted in 2015, actually, but as they have been rolling down and we've been receiving more and more materials via the state or some very innovative districts, the testing for them didn't take place until 2021. That was our first time for 4th and 5th grade, which is some of the grades that I have taught previously. And so we pretty much stayed with our old standards because that's what was being tested. And so we jumped in the deep end as the quarantine and online teaching and everything took place, especially in the Provo City School District.
Wow, what a time to get new information to teach in your class.
Yeah. I recently talked with a student and she said, I really hate science now because she loved to learn in the memorization way. You know, the teacher presented content and we found out what the students' misconceptions were. So we planned another lesson so that they could uncover or memorize new facts. And it's not that way anymore. They have to lead that investigation. They have to find out from inquiry and making their own models and then having class discussions facilitated by a teacher who should be knowledgeable of these science concepts. But it makes the students very uncomfortable. And as a teacher, I want to go in and rescue my kids, but they need to wallow in that deep end just like we are. And I think when I framed it that way, that we're both struggling at the same time with this new way of teaching and inquiry and them learning in this inquiry way, she had a little more understanding of how uncomfortable I am, and as well as I had more understanding of how uncomfortable she was.
Okay, so previously with science standards and like traditional science pedagogy in our state, it's been very formulaic. You teach the scientific method, you present an activity, they do it, they fill out a worksheet maybe, they identify the knowledge that they came across. But now it's not like that. It's what inquiry do you have? What question do you have? And how are we going to construct knowledge together? So it is uncomfortable for both the students and the teachers.
Yes.
Because probably teachers were taught this way as well, and then taught that way as well. And now it's a big shift.
One of the things that I have found interesting is that as students sit down and you present a phenomena. And so I showed them this flash flood coming down, and people could hear it, and they could hear the rumble, and they knew that it had rained, and you could hear the people talking in the background. And then the flash flood comes through, and the big tree trunks or rocks and just muddy water. And my students didn't understand why that was such an unusual event. They didn't understand what precipitated it and why it was flowing the way that it was flowing, because they hadn't witnessed it. And yet, for the people down in San Juan County, they see that often. And those flash flood warnings coming out of those slot canyons, it's an important thing to make sure you know. So that's when I thought, oh, I really have got to come local and find better phenomena for my students to see, and stuff that they could witness right here in their backyard that would drive their questions.
So with the flash flood, did you present a video? Is that the resource you were showing them? And it just wasn't experiential enough. It was observing something, but without context, without like being in the space, without knowing like the consequences of a flash flood.
Yes, that's exactly it. In fact, I did have one student who had hiked down in that area, and she knew all about it, but no one else did.
Yeah, you can't have just one student excited about it. Okay, so what did you find as local phenomena that your students have experienced that they could explore and base their inquiry after?
They are witnessing right above them on the bench a lot of building going on. A lot of their fathers are involved in construction. And so I thought, putting those two things together would be really, really good. So I showed a news clip of a home that was being built, and it slid off of its foundation and ended up in the street. And then currently in Provo City School District, we have a high school who is also sliding off of its foundation. Every year we have a very wet winter year. And so they're rebuilding. And a lot of the kids are realizing that that's the high school that they feed into. So it was a really good thing for them to have two things that were very, very close together. And in fact, after I showed the video clip and we talked about what they knew about Timpview High School, they came to me and they said, "Now, Mrs. McCulloch, we live down here in the valley. We're okay, right? My house isn't going to slide if I leave the garden hose on." And I said, "No, your house isn't going to slide." And then we talked about why is your home safe? And as we finished the whole unit, one kid says, "I'm always going to make sure that I never live on a mountainside." So I thought, well, maybe that'll carry over when they grow up.
Yeah. Well, now compared to the flash flood example, they really know why it's important to understand why a house would slide into a street. So now you have these local phenomena. How do you get the students to be curious and to have inquiry about the local phenomena?
As we move from earth science thing where they can really see it impacting them into the other types of science, that's when it got to be very tricky, because the phenomena was often just a picture that they would observe. And the last one I had was looking at a patch of grass, a single grass underneath a microscope. And I got very generic, boring answers. And I wanted them to go deeper. They needed to go deeper, but I, as a facilitator, did not know how to do that. And
were they saying things like green, pointy?
Exactly.
Maybe 3 inches, kind of obvious.
And part of that is when some of the phenomena that you show, they can't really pull out exactly what it is because it's either too close or it's far away, or they just are unsure. And there's this quiet because they don't like to be uncertain, so they don't want to let their peers know that they don't know. We're really trying to increase the equity in the classroom and validate all voices. Part of the reason is we want to have divergent views as well as convergent views, and let that beginning discussion really become a rich opportunity for them to develop a whole bunch of inquiry type of questions about how do we figure out how this phenomena works? And then allow the kids to take their own questions and solve that scientific problem. And so that uncomfortableness is something that we need to become comfortable with, and that they also need to learn that they're in this classroom space. It is acceptable to throw out any type of idea and access your own schema, or just use that text evidence that's there in that picture or that video.
So you have also used arts integrated strategies to help the students be more successful in rich description of their observations of phenomena.
Yes. And so after I had that, crickets, anybody experience, and trying to really just get the kids to feel comfortable in that space, I started trying to brainstorm what are some of the strategies that I have used in the past where I got great conversation going. And it came to me that visual thinking strategies would meet this unique need where students can say almost anything because it's art. It's what I see, and it's in my imagination, and it's a safe place. And so I went to my visual thinking strategies to just warm them up, to have a great discussion in the classroom, agreeing to disagree, building their curiosity, and it's practicing their own observational skills. They can use sentence stems like I noticed or I think, and then another person will say, make a connection with that and say, oh, and I see. And so by bringing in a visual piece of art and having this great discussion of what they're seeing.
Okay, so where does visual thinking strategies come from? And can you walk us through what that would look like?
Sure, I'd love to. In fact, it comes from the MoMA, the Modern Museum of Art in New York. And an art educator there, Philip Unawine, started this process when he was bringing classes and curating things for interaction with patrons or even students. And he works with a cognitive psychologist, Abigail House, and visual thinking strategies. And it's a way to open up students' interpretation of artwork. What you do is you show them something, an art piece, and I'm going to just use one that I've used recently in my classroom, and that is Piet Mondrian's Boogie Woogie. I asked, what do you see? And of course we had crickets. And then I said, anybody, what do you see? And so I had a student say, I see some yellow and red squares. I see some blue and black lines. I see some big blotches of colors. And as I asked them the next question, what makes you say that? Then they got a little more descriptive. I had a student who said, I think it looks like city streets. What makes you say that? Well, it looks like all those red and yellow small squares are at intersections. And then I'd ask another question, what more can we find? Which invites someone else to make their observations. And it's so funny because at the very beginning, it's really slow. And then all of a sudden, once they realize that I'm just paraphrasing what they are saying, they're getting more and more accepting of divergency. And then the last thing I lead them with is an I wonder question. And that I wonder question isn't in the visual thinking strategies, but I needed them to generate some questions. I'm trying to make a bridge between these visual thinking strategies with art. I'm going to be using that same language when we start doing phenomena in the classroom to prime them with this in a comfortable place, talking about art, to the science place and making that transfer. We're going to hear these same questions. I understand that this is a safe place so that we can go into that phenomena and those inquiry and investigation led by students rather than investigation from a teacher.
So they're reading works of art with visual thinking strategies as a warm-up or a practice or an enculturation to a similar process they're going to go through, but they're going to be reading a phenomena rather than a work of art.
That is exactly what I was planning.
That's so great. So what happened? Did you do it?
Yes, I actually have done it. When we were observing water condensation, they really couldn't see what it was. It was a really strange type of view. And I just started asking those questions again. What do you see? Just always following up with the same student. Then they have to have a because. And that's where they get into that text evidence. The text evidence can either be in the text or from their own schema. And so once they have kind of depleted what they want to say, then I paraphrase what they say to, either help the rest of the class understand what they were saying if they couldn't hear them that well, or it just validates that student's speaking. The other thing that I've learned with visual thinking strategies is when you do validate a student's statements is I don't want to pass any judgment on anything a student says. And that really does encourage more and more students to talk. And then that's when I pass the baton on to the next student, I'll say, now what more can we find? And that's when another student will speak. The great thing about this too is you get your eager beavers in your classroom who always talk. And then after they've all done their thing, then your little more reticent students will start talking. And if you are smart enough, you'll just let a pause, and then usually you can get that one reluctant speaker to finally make a comment, because he's been thinking this whole time. He's learning that voice that he has is valid. And that's when you bring on that last part. Now, what do you wonder?
I think with works of art and using visual thinking strategies, for me, it's very comfortable because I understand that artists are creating from their own interpretation of their lived experience, of their way of being in the world. So if they have a unique interpretation, thinking divergently in possibility. With science, is there a right interpretation of a scientific phenomena, unlike a work of art?
I'm glad you brought that up. When we are working with the phenomena itself, as we start branching into the science discussion, the phenomena is an anchoring type of a thing that we can come back to over and over. And the whole thing is for the students themselves to direct their inquiry in uncovering what really does happen. And so at the very beginning, there might be lots of misconceptions, and they're going to have to come up with some ways that we can test those hypotheses, and it's coming from the students themselves. What would we need to study? What kind of texts would we need, or what kind of experiments are we going to need to perform in order to figure out how this really, really works? But there's so many things, especially in chemistry, where we think it's one way, but it's really not. One of the things that they have experienced, ice bursting a Gatorade bottle in the freezer, or mom warning them never put a soda bottle in the freezer. And so right now, that's what we're grappling with is density, and what does it really mean, and is it the same as weight? So that's kind of the new conception they have.
Interesting. Did this misconception come while they were doing visual thinking strategies?
That was part of the whole process, because I was showing them a glacier. And there's, it sinks, more of it sinks into the water, and there's just a little tiny bit on top. So it's definitely very dense. It's denser than water. And then another kid said, we just did history and the USS Arizona and how it's in Pearl Harbor. And they're like, but the ship sunk. But how can it float? But it sunk. So it's all those things. And I really love the connections that they were making, those interconnections. And that's exactly what you want them to do in order to be willing to explore the world as a scientist would.
Your example there reminded me of my science fair project I did with my dad, who's a civil engineer. He really let me ask my own questions, and then he was there to guide me. And he's the one who taught me buoyancy and helped me, gave me the idea to measure. But it was because I wondered, which one is going to sink? Which one is going to float? What's the better design? And so I love that memory. Thanks for helping that come back, because I am smiling about that. Okay, Tina, thank you so much for sharing how you use visual thinking strategies to support science learning in your classroom. We will put links in the show notes to visual thinking strategies, to Mondrian's Boogie Woogie, to anything that Tina mentioned in this episode that you would be interested in learning more about. So go ahead and check out the show notes. And then, Tina, tell us what we can look forward to in our next episode.
Our next episode is going to feature Mr. Dance. He has been instrumental in so many people's lives in integrating dance and science into their classrooms, dance and mathematics into their classrooms. He has influenced classrooms nationally and here in our local area. And so I would think he has over thousands of students who have been under his influence in the years that he has been practicing.
Yeah, I actually saw this last week, hundreds of students influenced by him as he was the producer for the Provo City School District dance concert. He is incredible. And those of you who are really well connected to our community here at the BYU Arts Partnership, you know exactly who we're talking about. Those of you who don't know, come and listen next week because you want to get to know Mr. Dance. It's going to be a great episode, and we look forward to having you there with us. Thank you for joining us for the Artful Teaching Podcast. We hope you enjoyed this conversation on STEM and the arts. Subscribe to our podcast for future episodes on arts integrated science, social studies, and literacy.
Artful Teaching is made possible by the BYU Arts Partnership and the McKay School of Education. Thank you to Tina McCulloch for hosting this series and to our editor, James Houston. And special thanks to all of the teachers who are changing lives while serving in schools.
If you like what you heard, please leave us a review and share with a friend. We believe artful teaching can change the world. And you can find all our episodes at advancingartsleadership.com, along with lesson plans, blogs, downloadable resources for the classroom, and more. Or follow us on social media at Every Child, Every Art. I'm Heather Francis.
And I'm Callie Phlox, wishing you an artful journey.